Arnie from Washington, you are on with Dave and Matt. How are you?
I'm fabulous. How are you guys doing?
I'm pretty good. How can we help?
Just so you know, I have a terrible cell phone, and so if I seem to talk over you, it might just be the delay. But I wanted to discuss the question you get all the time. They always ask you, Matt, in particular, what would it take to convince you of a God? And I know your answer to that, and I think it's a good answer that God would know, and He would be able to do that. But I just kind of wanted to talk about, like, it seems like there's both sides of both atheists and theists have the same problem, and it's like overcoming your preconceptions. Because I was thinking about that myself. Like, I mean, you do magic. You know that, if you see something demonstrated that seems miraculous, you're still not necessarily going to believe that just because of the miraculous nature of it.
Correct.
And so I don't really know how to overcome that preconception. I would summarize it by saying that atheists basically approach it by saying, given there is no God, what's the best explanation? Whereas a theist would say, given there is a God, what's the best explanation?
And I would offer
those are equal.
I need to offer a correction on that, because the problem with what you're saying is, here's how an atheist approaches it, and here's how a theist approaches it. You're assuming the conclusion, because I was a theist when I approached this issue. I was a Bible-believing, Southern Baptist raised, confident, fundamentalist, evangelical Christian. The difference was I was also a skeptic. I just hadn't applied skepticism to my religion. And so when I approached this question seriously, it became not, here's how a theist tries to, address this issue of whether there's a God, or here's how an atheist addresses it. It's about, here's how a skeptic addresses it. And so the real issue isn't, are you beginning as a theist or an atheist? Because that's a flaw. If you begin with the conclusion, obviously you've got some flawed reasoning there. But the real issue is to address the epistemology, or the methodology behind how somebody determines what's real or true. And for me, there needs to be evidence and a sound argument for a proposition. And what I found is that all the reasons that I had for believing in a God were not sound. They weren't based on good evidence, and they were logically flawed. And so if that's the key issue here, I want Dave to answer the question, because I've answered it many times. Dave, what would change your mind, or what would convince you that there's a God? Because that might help Arnie more than my answer.
I think what's been said many times by many other people is that incredible claims need incredible evidence. I mean, it's one thing for Matt to do a magic trick with some cards or rope or something. It's a parlor trick, yeah, or to remove his finger. That's a parlor trick. There's really not a lot weighing on that. Whether or not he really pulled his finger off, or whether that was an illusion of some kind, we can debate that. We kind of understand that he probably didn't pull his finger off. That's not something most people can do, or anybody can do. But when you make a claim that a God has a right to your life, and a Savior saved you, and your eternal destiny hinges on what you believe about that and what you profess about that, that's an incredible claim, and it has a lot riding on it. So I need some incredible evidence for something like that. And more so, when the God that I believed in most of my adult life was a God who was involved. He answered prayer. He directed you and guided you and those kind of things. And if we have a God like that, who's supposed to be involved in his creation's activities, and then we have issues going on where a God who's involved should step in and intervene. And when we have children being raped, sex trafficking going on, we have childhood diseases where parents are praying fervently night and day for their child to be saved and healed, and the child dies. And the God that is supposed to be involved with us and compassionate and all powerful is just not there. I would start with that kind of evidence, that there's a God out there who's involved with us. Otherwise, if it's a God who's not involved with us, what difference does it make? Big deal. There's some deist God out there who spun the top out into the universe and started the world, but he's not really doing anything. That doesn't interest me. If there's not a God who's involved with us, then what's the point of even calling him a God?
Yeah.
And what's the point of worshiping him? So
But
I would start with needing some evidence for that kind of a God, and I just don't see it. Never have.
I want to give you some time here, Arnie, both to tell us
Yeah.
what would change your mind and what you think about this, and continue on with, if we kind of sidetracked, if you had a different question.
No. I'm kind of in your boat, Matt. In your boat now. It's I keep thinking about, like, okay, even if I witness these miraculous things, I'm still going to think maybe there's, maybe I'm having some kind of, like, okay, for instance, I'm an ex-Mormon, and I used to think, and we were kind of taught this, that, okay, Joseph Smith was either a liar or he was telling the truth and he really witnessed this phenomenal event of seeing God. Now I kind of think, well, he could even have been convinced himself. He didn't have to be a fraud to be wrong. He could have had some kind of condition or mental illness. I mean, there's all kinds of explanations. And so now I'm kind of stuck because maybe it's just an unfalsifiable thing, period, where there is no evidence that would, be evidence enough. I don't know. I'm kind of stuck on that.
Can I ask a question real quick,
Like,
Arnie? You
Sure.
said, you alluded to something, and I want to make it clear, because you said if you keep witnessing miraculous things, you don't even know that you could reasonably conclude that they were from a God or whatever. And so I want to know, what miraculous things do you keep witnessing? Because I've never witnessed anything miraculous at all.
Fair question. I've had, I don't know, maybe 5 experiences in my life that I would, as a Mormon, I would have described as revelation. Now looking back, I'm finally, I think I'm just sort of getting more and more comfortable saying I don't know what those were. But each time what makes me a little bit suspicious that it might have been me is that each of those moments when I experienced this profound, overwhelming, comfort and love from what I felt like was outside myself, it was all those times I was in an extremely vulnerable emotional position.
Sure.
And so, but that doesn't negate the possibility that was some sort of, revelation or comfort from God.
So I have a couple other
maybe
questions.
Sure.
That might, I mean, and to be honest, these are questions that are intended to reach some sort of exposition. So without going into detail about what you experienced, I was reminded of a caller who called in recently to talk about how he was thinking about marrying this woman, and he prayed to God, and he said, God, I'm going to open the Bible and I want you to give me a message. And he opened the Bible to a seemingly random place, and right off the bat, it basically, there was some passage in the Bible that said, do not marry, or something like that. And he took that as a message from God. And that was, by the way, his strong evidence. We said, hey, present your best case. What's your strongest evidence for God? That's what he presented. Now, when you talk about things that you consider to be revelation and you were in a low point, here's 2 things to ask yourself and consider. And I'm going to tie this to the other caller just so that, you're on the periphery and I'm not coming at you. I'd love to ask the other caller if he thinks that God, the all-powerful, all-knowing, all-wise governor of the universe, is allowing children to starve and get malaria and allowing wars and sex trafficking, but took time out to send him a vague message by having him open a book and find a particular scripture that he could interpret as if it were from God. That doesn't make sense to me. Dave's talking about we need a God that is, that is interactive or that is participatory with us. It doesn't make sense to me that if God actually wants to tell you, hey, don't marry this person, that you would have to open a book and find a passage. And it doesn't make sense that this God is keen to play your particular game, not you, obviously, Arnie, but your particular game of, okay, God, I'm going to open the book now, and whatever I find, that's what I'm going to do. I would think that if God has a message for you, why can't he just tell you? Why is there any ambiguity at all? Why could you ever be in a position where you think at one point you got a message from God, and later you're like, maybe that was me? Because I would think if there was a message from God, not only would it be clear to you instantly and forever, but if you ever had a weird doubt, God could clear that up for you. Clearly, if God's given you one message, then he should be able to give you another one and confirm, yes, in fact, that was me. I did send you that message. I did give you that piece of revelation. And the world doesn't make sense if that's true, but it does make sense if people credit a fictional God with things that they don't want to take responsibility for, or that they aren't sure they can take responsibility for.
A little bit to that, and then I'll let you respond to that. But I like to think of it in terms of, I'm a father, and our Christian religion Bible tells us to think of God as a father, our Father who art in heaven, right? So I can't imagine any of my kids, me playing this kind of hide and seek game with any of my kids. If there were messages that I felt like were important for me to present to them, get to them, things that I felt like were important for them to know, and they came to me with a question, Dad, what do you think about this? I can't imagine me just spitting out some kind of a riddle and them going away confused and perplexed and wondering, and did Dad mean this? Did he mean that? What was he trying to tell me? It's such a mystery. Yeah. What is he trying to tell me? And then me saying, you're going to have to figure that out. I can't tell you everything. Well, Dad, it's important. It's really important, this thing I'm asking you. Well, too bad. Here's another riddle. And that's kind of how God seems to do. And people, what you're explaining, maybe it was God, maybe it wasn't. Well, was it? Why is it so complicated? This God who wants to communicate with us, and apparently there are really important things he wants to communicate with us, but he just can't seem to get through. And I encourage you to ask yourself that. Why is he so damned complicated? Why is he so evasive and elusive? Like he's playing some kind of a game with us? Because that's what it sure seems like.
Well, those are both fair criticisms. Let me give you my former Mormon perspective.
Sure.
I assume you both saw Karate Kid?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So
yeah.
I thought of the whole interaction with God, and having to trust and not understand what he was doing. It's kind of like when he said him, wax on, wax off, wash this, wash that. So when he was doing those things, he didn't know why he was doing it, but he was trusting in this authority figure that it would later on make sense, or there'd be some purpose in doing it.
The problem is Mr. Miyagi. The problem is Mr. Miyagi was real and was actually there communicating. This isn't just, hey, God gave me a message and I'm not sure what it means. It's, I got a message and I don't know it's from God. So it would be like Daniel walking over to a place where he's told there's a karate master, and he just gets the feeling that the karate master wants him to paint the fence.
That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I remember when I was a Christian, everything was so complicated. And whenever I had a thought as a Christian, I had to try to discern, is this from God? Is it from the devil? Could it be Satan? Or is it just my own flesh interjecting? And it was just always this puzzle that I had to try to sort out. There was nothing clear. And this was me trying my best to hear God's voice, trying my very best on a daily basis to hear and understand God's voice and God's will. And yet, even with that, it was just this complicated morass of just, whose voice is this? And it's just, like Matt said earlier, life just makes so much more sense when you take that out of the equation.
Yeah. No, thank you guys. I appreciate. One quick question for Dave. Dave, it's an honor to talk to you. Is the shower curtain still available?
Yes, it is. Go to my website, daveoutloud.com. You click on the merch thing. You can get a shower. You can get a shower curtain with my face on it. I think it's around $40. I mean, for the price of $40, you can shower with Dave. I mean, how great is that?
That's amazing. That's amazing.
All right. Thank you, man.
Thank you both. Thank you both.
Thanks,
All right.
Arnie. Appreciate it.
All right. Bye.
Well,
Matt, somebody has actually ordered the shower curtain. I saw a picture of it.
I'm going to order one as soon as we're off the air because I'd like to shower with Dave.
Well, who wouldn't?
I'm getting side eye from the other side of the room now, but
You should.